us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. On CABC3, the future of broadcasting, with your host, Darnell Duff.
That ball hit him hard. Stretch. Austin Jackson back looks up. Buchanan put it on the board. Yeah.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That's right. It's time for the First Row Sports Show here on CABC, the future of broadcasting. I know we haven't came live to you in quite a while. Today we are live. Theo Tutkaluk is with the booth today. How are you doing today, Theo?
Great. Good to see you this afternoon, Darnell. We've got quite a conundrum, if you will. There's too much sports to talk about, but we got to pick something. So why don't we just pick off that topic that we know that you and I both love to talk about, probably the last time we'll talk about it for quite a while. That's our Canadian team, the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yeah, and I guess they were hoping for 2 more wins. Well, I guess 6 more wins to win the World Series. It did not happen. They were really just outplayed by the Kansas City Royals in losing that series 4-2 in the American League Championship Series. Nonetheless, the farthest they've been in over 22 years. Last time they went that far, they won the World Series in 1993. They're hoping for that to happen again this year. Why? At the end of the day, though, why did the Toronto Blue Jays fall just that short against the Kansas City Royals?
I think it comes down to a complete baseball game with all 3 facets working to your advantage. And we talk about the 3 being offense, defense, and your pitching. Quite frankly, everyone was worried about the long ball with the Toronto Blue Jays. The Royals actually had 7 home runs to Toronto's 5. Having that said, more games were played in Kansas City where it is more of a small ball friendly type of baseball game. Toronto simply just couldn't get the bats going when they needed them the most. I mean, ultimately, if you win a game 4-3, that's great, but you don't need to win games 10-5 or 8-1 or 8-2. The pitching was suspect for the Toronto Blue Jays. I mean, you look at Price, you look at R.A. Dickey, both starting pitchers were definitely struggling. And you look at the youngsters of the Toronto Blue Jays, Estrada, Osuna, Escobar. I mean, all those guys, those 3 in particular, they are going to be the Blue Jays' future in the coming years. Marco Estrada signed his ticket, signed his kid's ticket, signed his grandkid's ticket.
Extension ticket, that's for sure.
Oh, he is. I mean, whoever picks up this gem, let me tell you, he's going to be paid quite a handsome ransom, as far as I'm concerned.
He poses me as a guy like Jamie Moore, as far as he's not going to heat up the gun. He's going to throw maybe 91 or 92 with a lot of movement, and then his changeup. I mean, going into the year, Marco Estrada was a wild card. I mean, who knows what was going to happen for the Toronto Blue Jays. Maybe he was going to have a good year. He could have been terrible. He had a great year. One of the best Toronto pitchers in the second half for sure. And I mean, he was definitely, in my mind, the best pitcher for the Toronto Blue Jays in the playoffs. I mean, David Price obviously had his best playoff performance ever. He was 0-7 going into the game. He's going to be saddled with another loss. But, I mean, David Price was really good. But let's look at some stats from the ALCS Game 6. The Toronto Blue Jays were 0-12 with runners in scoring position. Alex Anthopoulos, really the catalyst of all the moves the Toronto Blue Jays said, that would never happen again. They were 4-41 in their 4 losses against the Kansas City Royals. This is a team that put the most runs up in the MLB by over 80 runs. They had the most home runs. They had the most RBIs. This is an offensively gifted team. Why did they struggle so much? You talked to me the other day, was they're a home run hitting team playing in Kansas City where you do not hit home runs. I watched some of their at-bats. They're going for home runs every time. Why was that the decision they made?
I completely agree with you on that, Darnell. We talked about this last weekend. If you saw that Game 6 in Kansas City, you were looking at players at bat with runners in scoring position, even when the bases were empty, and they wanted to go yard all the time. They weren't looking to put runners on base. They weren't looking to advance runners. That only occurred in the top of the 9th inning when they realized that was their last chance. I mean, outside of what they did in the 9th, you had 9 runners in scoring position prior to that in the entire game, and you went 0-4. So when you're the Toronto Blue Jays batters and you're thinking one-track minded, go for the fence, on the contrary, they should have been trying to play some small ball like Kansas City does. That's how Kansas City eventually won the game, on a single with an errant throw. And I'm still baffled by how a single, when the runner is on first, is able to get all the way around 3 more base pads to get home. And Bautista, with one of the best arms in right field, throwing the ball into the infield. I don't understand. I was almost speechless watching that on Friday night, because I just couldn't understand why that occurred. Maybe it was a blank in the brain, fog hat, who knows. But the Kansas City Royals took advantage of it. Well, and in the 9th inning, every game, from game 1 to game 6, once their starters were off the mound, KC's middle bullpen and their final bullpen was illustrious. They were sensational. And they were clearly a mark above every single pitcher that Toronto had.
Well, it's not often that base coaches get a lot of credit in the MLB, but I think for that specific play and the reason why Kansas City's third base coach sent Lorenzo Cain home, I think he's got to be the clubhouse favorite at this point. I mean, he did a great job of realizing that Jose Bautista's throw was going to be offline. Not exactly sure why he only threw to second base. I mean, I understand the throw was right on the money at second base, and they tried keeping Hosmer to only a single, which they did. But at that point, give Hosmer a double, whatever. You got to be able to cut off Lorenzo Cain, who we know he's a speedster. And they didn't, and they lost the game. But let's look a little bit deeper in the stats before we talk about the Kansas City Royals against the New York Mets. That's going to start tomorrow. On July 31st at the trade deadline, the Toronto Blue Jays were 50-51 in 4th place and 8 games back of the New York Yankees. They were 48-23 since the after the All-Star break, leading the American League in runs, 405 home runs, 117, and earned run average at 333, among some other categories. And they also had sellouts in 20 of their last 21 games. Talk about the fans in Toronto. I understand maybe there was a few bandwagoner fans after the success they had, but overall, the praise that this Blue Jays team got was phenomenal.
It's exciting to see a team that's winning and putting a good product on the field, and ultimately Toronto was given a phenomenal option and a chance to see postseason baseball that they haven't seen in 22 years. And they've been, with Alex Anthopoulos, they've been given this choice, or they've been given this word of someone saying, this is going to be our year. This is going to be our year. And they've made trades in the past for R.A. Dickey and Reyes and whatnot. But this year was different. I think they attacked every single option available, getting Tulowitzki in there, getting a starting pitcher in David Price, getting some more bats, getting some relievers. The bottom line was AA figured this was going to be the right year to make this push. He was able to make some key adjustments, some key moves. They solidified that infield. I think this infield from top to bottom is pretty sensational. Very little errors were occurred. I think that's the one stat we haven't looked at. There's a number of errors that were occurred in August compared to May, June, and July in the infield. Because if you're getting rid of Jose Reyes, there's a huge difference between Reyes playing defense and Tulo. So that solidified that infield big time. I mean, Goins wants. Some people think he should be getting a Gold Glove. Colabello, doing what he's doing at first with Encarnacion, and of course, the bringer of rain, Josh Donaldson. He was unbelievable at third base. He made some
MVP caliber season. I mean, but at the end of the day, do you think Josh Donaldson is crowned MVP over Mike Trout?
I think so, because if you look at how Trout kind of dipped a little bit through August and definitely into September, and he kind of regained a little bit at the end of September, the Angels were riding on both Pujols and Trout and their pitching, and all three of them failed at the very end. I think Pujols hasn't had a batting average that low ever, but he's had a lot of power, which is one thing. But getting these people on base is the most important for a lot of these teams, because if you look at what Kansas City has done, they've had ultimate clutch hitting, getting a run of 3 or 4 or 5 hitters back to back to back on base with singles, with doubles, not relying on the home run. I mean, this is the second time that Kansas City came back, first in the ALDS and then now in the ALCS, against both Houston and Toronto, where they were down a considerable amount of runs, and they came back and won both games. So they rely on key hitting and timely hitting and not the big ball hitting.
Well, let me ask you a tough question. And with as much as that was invested in this team, yes, they had a great year, 48-23 since the trade, or since the All-Star break, rather. Great, phenomenal year. First time they've done this since they won a World Series in '93. But with as much as they invested in this Toronto Blue Jays 2015 season. Is Alex Anthopoulos deserving of a job come next year? Now, I know he said he doesn't really want to talk about negotiations at this time. He has one more month left in his contract. But let me also pose to you the other question. Let's look 3, 4, 5 years down the road. A lot of those guys, including David Price is a free agent, Mark Lowe's a free agent, Marco Estrada's a free agent, Jose Bautista's in his contract year, Edwin Encarnacion's in his contract year. They could be losing a lot of pieces, and let's look at the farm systems, AAA, AA, single A. There's not a lot there. Alex Anthopoulos gave away a lot of the farm, like I said before. Where do you think Alex Anthopoulos' fate lies with the Toronto Blue Jays going forward?
I think it lies in with how well he maintains the current roster. And like we've mentioned, the AAA, AA system, there's not a lot left in there after these transactions that occurred during the summer. I mean, you have to really focus on Osuna, Stroman, Estrada. Those are your keys right there. You're going to lose Dickey. You're going to lose Burley. They're probably going to retire. Burley's going to retire this year. R.A. Dickey probably the next year or two. That will free up some money for the pitching staff. When it comes to hitters and it comes to management, I've always said, unless you have somebody that you can replace that person with that is as good, if not better, then you go ahead and do that. But let's look around the MLB right now. Is there another GM like Alex Anthopoulos that would be available? My guess and my answer is probably not. Well, when I look at Joey Bautista and Encarnacion, and you look at those two guys in particular, yes, they are getting up in age. Is there someone that could be relevant enough to replace them in not only their role as a batter, but also their role in defense?
Well, I am questioning what's going to happen with the Blue Jays in the next 2, 3, or 4 years, like I said, with the systems they have. But after what Alex Anthopoulos did this year, giving them a chance to win the World Series, unfortunately they did not. I don't see how you don't give him at least another 1 or 2 year contract. I mean, he was the catalyst why the Toronto Blue Jays were so good. If they didn't make the moves to get David Price, Mark Lowe, guys like that, they wouldn't be in this situation. Marcus Stroman obviously came back after odds that were stacked against him after that ACL tear he had in the spring training. But I mean, in my mind, you have to give Alex Anthopoulos at least 1 or 2 more years. But at the end of the day, the Toronto Blue Jays lose in 6 games. The New York Mets and the Kansas City Royals, Game 1 of the World Series, set for 8 p.m. Eastern tomorrow at Kauffman Stadium. And with the Kansas City Royals having home field advantage for the entire World Series bid, that All-Star game win by the AL, does that favor the small ball team in the Kansas City Royals?
I think it must, because you look at how Kansas City plays at home and how well they play in front of their fans. You're playing 4 out of those 7 games in Kansas City. Not to take anything away from what New York has done in their Cinderella story, but I mean, adding the bats of David Wright, Yoenis Cespedes for the New York Mets, outside of that, they're going to have to play a small ball style of baseball. Now, they've got a couple other hitters, Harvey that's in there right now that's batting 6 games straight with home runs. The question is, does that continue? Probably not. Is the pitching for the Mets as strong as, if not better, than the Royals? I mean, DeGrom and Syndergaard versus who Kansas City has. I mean, there's some hurlers there that throw 100 miles an hour. The other thing you have to look at is that 9th and pivotal batter, whether or not that's going to matter for the Mets or for the Royals. I mean, obviously in the NL, you have to have your pitcher batting. But in Kansas City, New York has that option now where they can put in another batter, potentially something with a bit of power, a bit of running, a bit of speed, someone else, as opposed to worrying about having a pitcher batting all the time.
Well, I think what an advantage that the National League always has and has had over the American League over the years is the fact that they are a better team historically at playing small ball. Now you're playing a Kansas City Royals team that can play small ball. I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised to see a guy like Eric Hosmer or Mike Moustakas play some small ball this series. Kansas City is a small ball team, and I think they are a better team than the New York Mets. So how are the Mets going to be able to get over that hurdle and maybe even make this one a series?
Their starting pitching has to be strong and has to be like lights out. Like I mentioned, DeGrom and Syndergaard are 2 of those 4 horses off the mound for New York. They are going to have to pitch lights out without giving Kansas City that opportunity to get 1, 2, or 3 runs early. New York has won many of their games in the postseason because they are scoring early. especially against the Cubs. They had, I think, 8 or 11 of their 17 runs were in the first or second inning. So whoever gets on top first in each or either game is obviously in a better stance to win that game and potentially the series.
Well, there's going to be some drama in this series, the New York Mets and the Kansas City Royals. The Kansas City Royals last won the World Series in 1985. The New York Mets won their last championship in 1986. Now these two teams are going to meet in the Fall Classic. All the marbles are on the table. Game 1 starter for the New York Mets is going to be Matt Harvey. He was 13-8 with a 2.71 ERA in the regular season, to be determined for the Kansas City Royals. First pitch tomorrow is going to be 8 p.m. Eastern. 5-2-1, 11 out of 16. The Winnipeg Jets are on fire. We're going to talk about it. You're listening to the First Row Sports Show on CABC, the future of broadcasting.
At CABC3,
our shenanigans are cheeky and fun.
Unlike those other guys.
His shenanigans are cruel and
All right, welcome back to the First Row Sports Show on CABC3, the future of broadcasting. Darnell Duff and Theo Tutkaluk. Before the break, we talked about the Toronto Blue Jays, their season, and the New York Mets and the Kansas City Royals. Also, if you're university basketball fans, check out CanadaWest.tv on Winnipeg Westman game days. You can join Darnell Duff and Theo Tutkaluk. Also, we're going to have a link for MixLR. So if you don't want to go on Canada West TV and get a login, which you have to pay to watch the games, you can just download the free iPhone app or check it on your computer, and you can listen to us live bringing you university basketball. It's a great way to spend your Friday and Saturday nights. Well, I think it is. Hopefully you do too. Anyways, let's talk about sports. Let's talk about the Winnipeg Jets. 5-2-1 through 8 games. They had a big win against the Minnesota Wild last night. Now, I know it is only early season play. I mean, they're only 8 games through. But the fact that they're only 2 points behind in a Central Division that is probably the best division in the National Hockey League, that has to be pretty impressive on your side, Theo.
When you look at the fact that the Winnipeg Jets started the last 2 previous seasons 4-5-1, and now you look at the Jets saying now they're 5-2-1. They started off with a 4-game road trip on the East Coast, come back for 5 here. They got tomorrow night against the Kings, Thursday night against the Blackhawks. They are playing some very strong opponents, and we've talked about this on and off the air over the last couple of weeks, Darnell, about how every team in their division, even in the conference, has gotten stronger, and the Jets have been like, meh, they've gotten okay. They had a couple of different transactions. They bring back Burmistrov, they got rid of Toulouse, and they got rid of Stepniak, and they've got Ehlers and Scheifels and Nick Patan now playing on the big boy crew. So you look at how this team is now formed in the first 8 or 9 games. You're seeing offense in different ways. I mean, Drew Stafford is playing lights out. He's playing pretty good hockey. Little Ladd and Wheeler have got some chemistry going on. Nick Ehlers has 3 goals on the campaign already. And Pavlik and Hutchinson are going back and forth for the most part, especially during back-to-back games where Pav plays one and Hutch plays the other. So there is some chemistry, there is some game plan, some strategy with the front office of the Jets, and it seems to be working well. They have played great teams. They have played division rivals, and now they're going to finish up against the Kings, who are red-hot, winning 5 in a row, and the Blackhawks on Thursday, one of the Stanley Cup champions. So they're going to finish off this homestand with 2 very good, very pivotal games. Let's see how it works out. I think, for the most part, the Winnipeg Jets are doing a good thing, and I think it's working with the right strategy and the right campaign for them.
Yeah, and the big question I had with the Winnipeg Jets is they didn't have a bona fide first liner who's going to be able to put up 30 or 40 goals a year. But, I mean, the Winnipeg Jets are playing with what they have. I mean, like you said, Wheeler, Little. These guys are playing really good. Trouba on the back end, Tyler Myers, Pavlik, and Hutchinson. I mean, this is a team that is, at this point, obviously they're a playoff team. I mean, well, they're on the cusp of making the playoffs anyways, but it's only 8 games through. There's still 74 games to go. They're going to have a really tough 2-game homestand now with the LA Kings. And but that's, at the end of the day, is this 2015-2016 Winnipeg Jets team through 8 games anyways, and what you've seen so far, what they've had to offer, are they a playoff team?
I mean, it's too early to say. The bottom line, like we've said, is use what you have, don't use what you don't have. The Jets aren't a A-line scoring juggernaut. They do not have a player like 87 or 71 or Johnny T or 88. So forget that. Scratch that idea. We can't rely on one player. We got to play a guilty by committee winning tradition here, where you have 3-4 lines going at it, where you're getting 3 or 4 lines of consistent play. You mentioned Jacob Trouba. He's leading the team in block shots. You talk about Tyler Myers, who is playing a lot more comfortable defense and not having to rely on Bufflin and Enstrom, who is now still pointless after 8 games and still deciding what size of a stick he should use because he keeps choking up on it. I'll leave him for later. But the Jets are realizing the good pieces are working, and they're relying on the good strengths of the young defense core and these new players adding the offense to where they need it. And you're seeing some balance. There hasn't been talk about contract negotiations. I mean, there's little to no ruffles in the feather and the tectonic plates going on there, which is kind of a good thing too, because it could be somewhat of a distraction. Andrew Ladd coming off surgery over the offseason on that sports hernia. He comes in and dials in with a goal last night, as does Brian Little. Drew Stafford scores 2 last night, so there's 4 of the 5 goals for the Winnipeg Jets coming from players you'd expect to see offense from game in and game out. And like I said, Ehlers has got 3 on the campaign already. Scheifele started with 4 out of 4 the first 4 games. So you're seeing goal scoring from all players from all lines.
Now, I guess, I don't know if you saw the words of Dustin Bufflin after that 3-on-3 overtime, but
I did.
Basically, he said, this is a joke. This isn't hockey. It's stupid. And personally, and I think there's a lot of people that are with me on this, I think having the 3-on-3 overtime is a great idea just to finish games. I mean, games should not be finished in a shootout. I mean, it's just not the way hockey games should be finished. So I think Dustin Bufflin, like I said before, I think Dustin Bufflin is, at the end of the day, he's more of a problem for the Winnipeg Jets than he is going to be a beneficiary for the Jets. But what are your thoughts on, I guess, the bold words of Dustin Bufflin?
When Dustin Bufflin delivers a soundbite, whatever it is, however long it is or short it is, it comes with a strong meaning behind it. After Friday night's game, after the loss against Tampa Bay, he was asked, what do you think of this 3-on-3 stuff? And absolutely he says, it's a joke. It's not hockey. It's a gimmick. And I kind of agree with Bufflin on this, because whether it be a shootout or 3-on-3, it isn't hockey. 4-on-4, 5-on-5. There were games, I mean, we're talking about a different type of game, so we can't compare it to the 80s or the 90s or what have you beforehand. The game still remains to be exciting. Now, when you have 3-on-3 hockey, there is plenty of ice out there. So let the kids play. I get that. But what's with the kids not playing 4-on-4 compared to 3-on-3? The stat on Saturday was 7 of the 12 games went to overtime on Saturday night. Of those 5 games that went into overtime, 4 of the 5 were settled with 3-on-3 wins, and only 1 out of 12 went to a shootout. So obviously, the debate is that, yes, it keeps it exciting. Yes, it allows for a win and a loss and less shootouts. Who decided this at the end of the bargaining table? Was it the NHLPA or was it the owners? It was actually the NHLPA that wanted the 4-on-4, and it was the owners that were saying, well, maybe we want to make this more exciting. Anyway you slice it, 3-on-3 is the same kind of gimmick as a shootout. It just isn't hockey.
Well, whether it be right, wrong, whatever you want to say, if it's not hockey, maybe it isn't hockey. I can understand your viewpoint that it's not hockey. It's different than 5-on-5. But I personally would rather see open ice, whatever you want to call it, open ice gimmick hockey that they're making plays than seeing a shootout, a team winning on a shootout. Personally, that's what I want to see. I don't know what any other people think. Yes, maybe it is a gimmick, but 9-0, the Montreal Canadiens, plus 23 over 9 games. Carey Price, obviously, is one of the best goalies, if not the best goalie in the NHL. They're 4-0 at home, 5-0 on the road. This team is perfect. 6 points up on the Tampa Bay Lightning. How long is this perfect streak going to last for the Canadiens?
You know, they're playing some teams in this upcoming week. I think we talked to a good buddy of mine earlier this afternoon, and now he's kind of worried about the game versus Vancouver. Vancouver's not had the greatest of starts this year, but they certainly have a lot of talent. There's a great goalie in Ryan Miller still in the pipes in Vancouver, so it could be one of those games that may take them to surprise. And, hey, you never know. The Jets go to Montreal and play them on Sunday. That could be the pivotal Sunday game where they might get their first defeat when they play the Jets. unbelievable play by Carey Price. You watch him move in the net. You watch him move around the crease. It's as if he owns the thing no matter what. No matter what kind of scenario or strategy or whatever's put in front of him, he's cool and calm and collected in that Habs uniform. He is the leader of that team, whether he's got a C on his jersey or not. Brendan Gallagher's playing with a bit of hard-nosed work ethic. He still has a perma-grin on his face, even though he's been an alternate captain. Patches and Subban, got some youngsters there. They are really leading this team in the right direction. I think with the addition of Jeff Petrie, although he wasn't much of an addition last year, this year he's providing some stalwart defense, a little bit more of a concrete in the back D part there. They're getting wins, like you said, 23 goals up. And the thing is, they're only, 6 points up on or 3 points up on Tampa right now?
Yeah, 6 points now.
6 points up. So they're 9-0, and they're only 6 points up. I mean, great. The last time the Habs did this, they won the Stanley Cup in '93. So maybe there's a bit of, in fruition here, back to the future thing. Who's to say?
I'm still on the fence as if this is a Stanley Cup team, but I mean, hey, what they've done has been remarkable so far. Now, I want to talk about the Edmonton Oilers for a little bit, and I don't know if you saw their game against the Los Angeles Kings last night, and Jonathan Quick robbed Connor McDavid. Yes, it was robbed, but I think Jonathan Quick is pretty happy that he has a pretty big mitt, because after looking at the replay, you can't tell me that small puck, the way Jonathan Quick got that puck did not cross the line. And Connor McDavid and everybody else on the ice that was an Edmonton player was like, yeah, that's in the net. And I think rightfully so that was in the net, but from the angles that they do the replays, it's pretty much impossible to see with the mitt size that Jonathan Quick has. They won that game in 3-2 in regulation. That should have been in overtime, but nonetheless, the Edmonton Oilers 3-6 on the campaign, 2-game losing streak. This team, I think they have an opportunity to be better than a lot of people thought they would be.
I think Chiarelli is kind of leaving his answers and my answers as well, or as agreeing with him, is leave them reserved. Let's see how the play goes here. Let's see how this team does here for the first 15, 20 games, and then start addressing some issues that may or may not be there. I think first and foremost, allowing this team to have 4 alternate captains instead of 1 leader and 3 alternates, a little bit of a different push because it doesn't give you a true identity of who's that leader that you can actually look to in the locker room. I mean, Ferentz was that person last year, but you've got him along with the 3 newbies from the front end, Hall, Nugent-Hopkins, and I think one more. Does that give you the opportunity to have, the right leadership in the locker room? Maybe it's the fact that the coaches are going to take the leadership with McLennan at the top of the heap saying, listen, I'm going to be your captain, you're going to listen to me, and we're going to work this out. All in all, 3-6, not a bad record. Certainly you'd rather be 6-3. But what do you really expect from the Edmonton Oilers coming in the first 10 games? I don't know. Go back to Quick's mitt. I mean, that thing holds a double loaf of bread. That thing's massive. It could cover the smog detail in Los Angeles for all it cares. But the bottom line is, you look at instant replays, and it's an ongoing thing all the time. Well, we didn't have this angle. If it was 5 degrees off here, if it was off the front there, you know what? There's so many camera angles. There's so many things involving to take away human error right now. It's almost like the game is technologically inclined. And I think other sports should realize that, technology has a role, but not the defining role.
Well, I think any sport you do, technology is there. Whether it be NBA, NHL, NFL, wherever you go, it plays a role. Let's talk about Connor McDavid, probably the most pressured player coming into this season, NHL-wide, really. I mean, he was supposed to be anyways, the next Sidney Crosby. 100%, I don't think he's going to put up what Crosby did in his first season. I mean, I think the game's just too tough. He's just not going to be able to do that on a team like the Edmonton Oilers this season anyways. Who knows, maybe in a couple of years he will be that star, but I don't think he's going to do it this year. How do you think the play of Connor McDavid has been for the Edmonton Oilers this season?
I think he's been what Edmonton has expected. I mean, you think of an 18-year-old joining an NHL league squad with all the hype, with all the energy surrounding him. He is bringing excitement to any rink he plays in. But the pressure is obviously there, and you cannot compare him to anybody else. And because the game has changed, the game is different, You're not going to see a 100-point scorer anymore. I mean, last year we had Jamie Benn lead the NHL with just under 89 points. And when you think about it, back in the 80s, you had Gretzky and Lemieux pushing 200. So the game has completely changed. There's a complete difference between an NHL game 20 years ago and today. Now, who's going to be the next guy that's going to be compared to Sidney Crosby? I don't know. And quite personally, I don't care. Because Sidney Crosby, at the end of the day, has won one Stanley Cup. Jonathan Toews, on the other hand, who nobody compares to, has won 2, 3. He's won championships all over the world.
That's always the question, too.
I mean, what kind of a guy do you want? Who would you rather?
Yeah, exactly. That's the question. Who would you rather?
Do you remember who Johnny Toews was being compared to when coming out of Winnipeg and coming out of the junior program? Do you remember another 19 that he was compared to? It's Brian Trottier for the New York Islanders, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, Brian Trottier was the centerman, second-line, third-line centerman, in the shadows of Mike Bossy in all those years in New York. But he was the leader. He was Captain Canada, or captain for the Islanders for many years. And he was the guy that was the leadership that what New York needed. I mean, if you look at that look at that team in the 80s, you had John Tonelli, you had Bob Nystrom, you had Gillies, you had Mike Bossy, you had Brian Trottier, just to rattle off a couple names that I can remember off the top of my head. Johnny Toews is that guy that wrestles up every single player. And we've talked about a nucleus and how well you keep a nucleus together compared to what ins and outs occur over the course of a team, especially with the salary cap and the trade deadline that goes on every year now. I'd rather take Johnny Toews. At the bottom line, when you tell stories to your kids and your grandkids, and you can hold up a mitt and you can hold 3 Stanley Cup rings, gold medals, World Junior Hockey Championships. I mean, outside of Scott Niedermayer, Johnny Toews is the next best thing that Canada's had in the last 20 years.
Well, I think Jonathan Toews also is gifted with one of the best, if not the best teams in hockey, players-wise, and Pittsburgh Penguins outside of Evgeny Malkin. I mean, but at the end of the day, I don't buy into who would I rather have. I think no matter who you have, if Sidney Crosby was put in Jonathan Toews' place in the Chicago Blackhawks, he would probably have 3 or 4 Stanley Cups.
I don't think so. And I don't think so because Sidney Crosby doesn't lead a team the same way that Johnny Toews does.
But how do we know that, though? How do we know 100% that Sidney Crosby doesn't lead the same way that Jonathan Toews does?
I think if you look at how he answers questions from reporters, his antics and his efforts on the ice, I mean, you look at Sidney Crosby and he makes every great player on his line great. Chris Kunitz gave him another year. 2 years, 3 years. Evgeny Malkin. I mean, is Malkin the same player as he is with or without Crosby? You can't deny that he's not a great player with him. He's a good player by himself, but he becomes even that much greater because you have to deal with the two-headed monster when they play any power play. Johnny Toews makes the entire team better. His work ethic, his respects off the golf course, but only on the ice, of course, allow the other teammates to play and to see the ice, the play, everything around the Chicago Blackhawks organization that much better. And I think it just shows more so for Jonathan Toews how much of a well-rounded individual he is compared to Sidney Crosby.
Well, at the end of the day, the Winnipeg Jets will continue their homestand tomorrow against the Los Angeles Kings, 7 p.m. puck drop. You can see it live on TSN 3 with Dennis Bag, or check out TSN Radio 1290 Winnipeg with Paul Edmonds and Brian Engblom. It's been the First Row Sports Show. Darnell Duff, Theo Tutkaluk. We'll see you after the break. Enjoy.